The Prime Minister is going to pay the EU, Mr. Speaker. He's going to pay the EU to abide by laws that we have no say on. While British farmers struggle with the family farms tax his Chancellor has imposed on them, their regulations will now be made in Paris and enforced in Brussels. It is a total capitulation. We're not in the EU. We are not at the table. So can the Prime Minister tell us how is he going to ensure accountability for the hundreds of regulations he has signed this country up to?
Ladies and gentlemen, Britain is back on the world stage, working with our partners, doing deals that will grow our economy and putting more money in the pockets of working people. In the last 2 weeks alone, we've delivered trade deals with India and the US. And that means jobs saved, jobs created, more growth. And a huge vote of confidence in this country. It shows that as global instability is rising, the decisions that we've taken to stabilise the economy and lead the way internationally have made Britain a place where people want to do business once again. And from that position of strength, today we have struck this landmark deal with the EU, a new partnership between an independent Britain and our allies in Europe. This is the first UK-EU summit. It marks a new era in our relationship. And this deal is a win-win. It delivers what the British public voted for last year. It gives us unprecedented access to the EU market, the best of any country outside of the EU or EFTA, all while sticking to the red lines in our manifesto about not rejoining the single market, the customs union, and no return to freedom of movement.
The Supreme Court has delivered a crushing blow to Keir Starmer, exposing what many suspected a secret plan to quietly align the UK with EU regulations without Parliament's approval or public debate. What was once dismissed as speculation is now confirmed in law. This wasn't diplomacy, it was deception. Starmer's government signed provisional deals behind closed doors, embedding Britain back into EU frameworks while avoiding the word rejoin. The court ruled the strategy unlawful, calling it a breach of democratic principles and a direct threat to parliamentary sovereignty. Starmer stands exposed, not just for overreach, but
Mr. Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls. The Prime Minister only tells people what they want to hear. He only tells people what they want to hear. He is a weather vane who twists in the wind. He cheered an ideology that denied safe spaces to women and girls because he thought it was cool to do so. He hounded a brave female MP out of his party for telling the truth he accepts now. And now he is hiding behind the Supreme Court judgment. And isn't that because he doesn't know what he actually believes?
for trying to rewrite Brexit without the nation's consent. And across Westminster, the fallout has only just begun. The legal blow wasn't just about procedures, it was about trust. The court didn't just strike down a policy, it exposed a governing philosophy rooted in control, secrecy, and a disregard for democratic norms. For months, Starmer's inner circle had carefully crafted a public narrative focused on stability and cooperation with Europe. But behind the curtain, legal filings and internal records showed something far more aggressive. His administration had been working systematically to harmonise British law with EU frameworks, drafting regulations, coordinating with Brussels officials, and embedding changes that mirrored EU standards. This wasn't a one-off policy experiment, it was a multi-phase roadmap. Quietly embedded into the fine print were clauses designed to lock Britain into long-term regulatory convergence. Environmental targets, trade compliance rules, and digital standards were all on the table, and all advancing without public knowledge. The Supreme Court's ruling described it as an attempt to rewrite the Brexit outcome.
To do a deal whereby 80 million young people will be able to travel to the UK without let or hindrance, making a nonsense of control of our borders. Worst of all, he wants to put this country in dynamic alignment, nothing less dynamic than the EU, but accepting all sorts of EU rules with no ability to vote on them or change them. He's turning us into the punk of Brussels. We should chuck out this appalling deal.
Without the public's consent. In doing so, it turned a legal case into a national reckoning. What started as bureaucratic fine print now looked like a blueprint to reverse a democratic mandate, by stealth, not by vote. The fallout wasn't limited to the legal sphere. The court's language made it clear this wasn't just poor judgment, it was a moral and constitutional failure. By using executive powers to reshape Britain's international position, Starmer's team had overstepped its authority. The court rebuked the entire process, calling it incompatible with the UK's democratic framework and branding it a violation of constitutional norms. At issue was the bypassing of Parliament. In a country where sovereignty lies with elected representatives, any major shift, especially one tied to national independence, must be debated and voted on. Starmer's team had done the opposite. They pursued sweeping policy changes through private channels, silencing public discourse and reducing lawmakers to spectators. The ruling underscored that such behaviour is not just wrong, it's dangerous. It weakens institutions, breeds distrust, and opens the door to unchecked governance. And now, with the legal judgment echoing through Westminster, the political cost is rising fast. The legal team that brought the case forward had argued one simple point. Starmer's EU strategy undermined both British law and the democratic will of the people. The Supreme Court didn't just agree, they reinforced it. The verdict made clear that embedding foreign regulations without public debate contradicted the laws passed after Brexit and disrespected the national referendum that defined Britain's political future. This wasn't a matter of policy nuance. It was a direct affront to millions who voted to leave the EU in 2016 and reaffirmed that stance in 2019. Starmer's leadership tried to reframe Brexit through quiet paperwork rather than open policy. That choice now looks like a calculated gamble, and one that failed spectacularly. Instead of healing divisions or moving the country forward, the secret deals reignited distrust. Voters were left asking whether their voice even mattered anymore. And in a post-Brexit Britain, that kind of disillusionment can fracture a government or a party overnight. Within minutes of the ruling, the political consequences began to unfold. Reform UK moved fast, framing the judgment as proof of a betrayal hiding in plain sight. Nigel Farage took to the airwaves, positioning himself as the voice of those who had been ignored. He wasn't alone. Conservative MPs seized the opportunity to brand Starmer a legal operator playing politics with national sovereignty. But what stunned Westminster more was the chaos erupting inside Labour itself. Shadow cabinet members expressed shock, not just at the ruling, but at the fact they'd never seen the full scope of the EU strategy. Many said they'd been handed vague messaging points, with phrases like rebuilding trust with Europe, but had no idea deals were being signed behind the scenes. MPs in Leave-leading constituencies were reportedly furious. For them, this wasn't just a political misstep, it was a betrayal of the very people who sent them to Parliament. The reaction was immediate, angry, and deeply personal. Starmer's inner circle hadn't just gambled with Brexit, they'd gambled with the loyalty of their own party. As backlash spread, Labour's internal machinery shifted into crisis mode. Communications teams rushed to spin the ruling as a legal clarification, but that narrative collapsed almost instantly. Legal analysts picked apart the judgment on live television, highlighting the court's explicit condemnation of executive overreach. This wasn't about clarifying rules, it was about exposing deliberate deception. Leaks from inside Labour HQ painted a picture of panic. Shadow ministers expressed disbelief at being left in the dark. Backbenchers warned of mutiny if transparency wasn't restored. Some described the strategy as political self-destruction, warning it could cost the party its standing in crucial battlegrounds. Even more damning was the revelation that many in Labour's leadership had been briefed only in half-truths, while Starmer's team quietly advanced agreements with EU counterparts. The sense of betrayal wasn't just ideological, it was personal. For a party that promised integrity after years of scandal, the damage went beyond headlines. It cut straight to its identity. As journalists dug deeper, the scandal grew. internal memos surfaced. Some marked confidential that outlined a clear strategy to realign the UK with EU laws without triggering public alarm. The documents detailed plans to use non-legislative mechanisms and obscure regulatory language to bring Britain closer to Brussels. Phrases like regulatory convergence and framework reintegration appeared repeatedly. The aim was subtle compliance, not open debate. These papers were traced back to senior advisors closely tied to Starmer, confirming that this wasn't accidental, it was orchestrated. Even more damning, staff were reportedly instructed to avoid leaving paper trails, downplay references to Europe, and stick to neutral-sounding phrases when questioned. What emerged was a picture of systematic deception, an effort to manage public perception while the real decisions happened out of view. As more documents leaked to the press, the backlash from inside the party intensified. For MPs already walking a tightrope between party loyalty and constituent trust, the revelations shattered whatever faith remained in the leadership's direction. The atmosphere inside Labour turned hostile. Furious MPs from Leave-supporting areas began demanding emergency meetings with senior leadership. Some frontbenchers threatened to resign unless full transparency was provided immediately. Others demanded to see every document and communication linked to the EU strategy. The tension boiled over when reports surfaced of a heated confrontation between Keir Starmer and Deputy Leader Angela Rayner. Though official statements from Rayner's office were measured, insiders revealed she was blindsided and livid. Her allies believed a small group of centrist advisors had hijacked the party's direction, excluding voices like hers that represented Labour's working-class base. Starmer's actions not only jeopardised Labour's election strategy, they undermined the delicate internal balance between its factions. Now, Rayner faces a critical choice: defend the leader and risk her credibility, or break ranks and represent the disillusioned base that propelled her rise. Either way, the party's image of unity is already shattered. The trust that held it together is slipping, and fast. Outside Labour, the political knives came out. Conservative ministers flooded the media, branding Starmer untrustworthy and undemocratic. They accused him of plotting to reverse Brexit through legal loopholes, not public consensus. Reform UK wasted no time either. Billboards, ads, and social media campaigns lit up with slogans like "Starmer's secret deal" and "You voted Leave." He tried to reverse it. Nigel Farage launched a media blitz, framing the ruling as proof of a coordinated attempt to drag Britain back into EU control. His base reawakened almost overnight. Supporters began organising rallies and petitions, while donations to Reform UK surged. Meanwhile, traditional Labour supporters, especially in the north, watched in confusion and disbelief. The party that once claimed to defend working-class interests was now accused of hiding backdoor treaties with Brussels. Starmer's team tried to contain the fallout, but they were quickly losing control of the story. The momentum had shifted, and not in their favour. Legal experts began unpacking the broader significance of the court's decision. Beyond striking down Starmer's plan, the judgment drew a bright red line around executive power. Any future attempt to forge international agreements of this scale, especially with supranational bodies like the EU, must now go through Parliament. No exceptions, no loopholes. The ruling didn't just stop Starmer's initiative. It set a legal precedent that would constrain future prime ministers from making sweeping foreign policy changes behind closed doors. It was a stern reminder that parliamentary sovereignty isn't just symbolic, it's enforceable. And Starmer's team, despite being stacked with legal professionals, had either misread or ignored that reality. The judgment also shattered the illusion that technocratic governance could operate above politics. Starmer's approach had relied on legal finesse, quiet deals, and administrative adjustments. But the court made one thing clear: if you bypass democracy, you don't get clever governance, you get constitutional crisis. As pressure mounted, former Labour staffers began speaking out. One whistleblower who had worked directly on the alignment strategy painted a troubling picture of life inside Starmer's operation. According to their account, internal culture revolved around secrecy. Staff were told to use vague language, avoid writing anything that could leak, and downplay any connection to the EU. Warnings about public backlash were reportedly dismissed. The leadership wasn't concerned with transparency, they were focused on control. "Don't rock the boat" became the unofficial motto, even as the strategy veered further from democratic norms. Public consultation was seen not as a necessity but a liability. These revelations turned an already damaging legal story into something far deeper, a matter of principle. The idea that a political leader would deliberately shield major foreign policy moves from voters struck at the core of public trust. And with the general election drawing closer, Labour's image problem had morphed into a full-blown integrity crisis. The timing couldn't be worse. Labour had been gearing up for its final push toward the next general election, preparing to unveil a message of national unity and steady leadership. But instead of rallying voters, Starmer now found himself drowning in accusations of secrecy, betrayal, and constitutional abuse. Every campaign speech was now a liability. Every press interview became a minefield. Journalists stopped asking about policy proposals and started demanding answers about undisclosed EU meetings, unsigned mandates, and ignored warnings. The focus had shifted, and Starmer couldn't control the narrative. Even within his campaign team, morale collapsed. Internal memos were hastily scrubbed. Legal teams were called in to assess potential fallout. Senior aides began weighing resignations. What was supposed to be a smooth march toward power had turned into a desperate effort to survive the week. Instead of debating the future of the country, Labour was stuck explaining its past decisions it never expected the public to find out about. Keir Starmer's leadership, once defined by cautious competence and legal polish, now faces a collapse few saw coming. The Supreme Court didn't just end a policy, it exposed a governing style, built on secrecy, shielded by legal jargon, and dangerously detached from democratic accountability. The damage is no longer theoretical. It's playing out in headlines, polling shifts, and a growing rebellion within Labour's own ranks. Backbench MPs are organising. Party staffers are exhausted, scrambling to contain leaks and silence internal dissent. Angela Rayner stands at a political crossroads, her silence growing louder by the day. Outside Parliament, the public mood is shifting. Swing voters are turning away, Reform UK is gaining traction, and the Conservatives, despite their own struggles, are united in using this scandal to dismantle Labour's credibility. Even trusted media allies have begun to distance themselves. Investigations continue into shadowy EU meetings held in embassies and hotels. Leaked documents show civil servants were coached to avoid public scrutiny. There's talk of emergency inquiries, resignation ultimatums, and even leadership challenges. The narrative is no longer about Europe. It's about trust, power, and the future of British democracy. And for Starmer, the verdict has already been delivered. Not just in court, but in the eyes of the nation.